These are lures that I bet you have tied on and fished with this fall, but let me guess, you're having trouble catching bass. No matter how many times you're told that fall fishing is fantastic, you keep getting skunked and feel like throwing in the towel.
Gosh darn it, I give up.
In this video, I'm gonna give you 5 helpful tips to catch more fish this fall and winter, and hopefully you don't feel like this.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it.
Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all. I can't believe what I just caught.
Yes! So why, with the exception of Minnesota and New York, is fall fishing harder basically across the board? Well, the first reason and tip number 1 that I have is that in the fall and winter, there are some massive changes taking place on your body of water. I think classic fall is walking out in the morning to it being 65 degrees outside, the next morning it's 25, and the morning after it's 55. As soon as water gets colder and then back to warmer and then colder again, it throws a whack in the entire ecosystem, and bass do not like rapidly changing conditions. There's a few times, usually warming water in the spring or a big front that blows in, that fish do tend to bite very well in those conditions, but for the most part, just like humans, bass don't like rapid change. And when the cold weather fronts move through your area, it changes water temperature, oftentimes brings wind with it that can change water quality, water color, water clarity. All of that changes and fish don't like it. And one change that I don't think people really understand is that as your water quality changes and your temperature changes, the amount of oxygen in certain parts of your body of water changes rapidly as well. And fish don't breathe water, they do breathe oxygen. They need oxygen to survive, and so does the entire ecosystem. The baitfish, the phytoplankton, everything needs oxygen. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure about that. But you get what I'm saying. The fish we are targeting need to be in oxygen-rich water. That's why in the summertime, fish oftentimes go to where the most oxygen is, and sometimes that's deeper water. In the fall, one part of your lake or pond can be really oxygen rich and the other part can be totally deficient of oxygen. And so looking at water with your bare eyes and even with electronics, you will not be able to tell which part of your body of water has more oxygen unless you know the bait fish are here, therefore the oxygen is probably greater here, therefore the bass are probably here as well. But just because the oxygen and thus the environment in one part of your body of water is great one day, that doesn't guarantee it's gonna be good the next day. As a matter of fact, bait fish ecosystems are so nomadic in the fall because they are constantly chasing the good water and therefore the good ecosystems. And one more big change for the fall is that water levels in both lakes and ponds across the country oftentimes drop. Therefore, the cover, the structure, the grasses, the woods that you were fishing in the spring and summer, you can see a stump, flip your jig over to it, catch a fish, that's great. The water drops 3 or 4 feet, that stump either has not as much water on it or is totally out of the water, and you're not gonna catch fish if you're not in the water. And as an angler, that can be incredibly confusing because you just spent the last few months getting used to and comfortable with your body of water, knowing where to cast, the best angles to cast, and kind of like your honey hole, your little rotation of spots. Then the water level drops. Not only do you not know where to fish anymore, oftentimes the fish don't know where to set up, and so they are nomadic. I'm gonna keep using that word. Fish are roamers, they are school-oriented, and they don't stay in one place for very long in the fall, which is why it's so hard to stay consistent on a bite. But one way to give yourself the best shot at staying consistent on a bite, consistent in catching fish, is understanding the forage base, what the bass are eating, which in the fall is 92% or more, I made that stat up. Almost all the time it is bait fish. Now I asked my followers on social media for their take on fall fishing, and Nolan Miner, my buddy from West Virginia, gave a really good explanation on bait fish in the fall. He said, bass are fished for so hard nowadays that they are extremely educated by the end of the season, aka the fall. That's in addition to the overabundance of real shad that they have access to in the fall as well. Meanwhile, we try to convince them to eat the fake ones. I think they're just way better at picking out the real thing by the time fall arrives and super sensitive to fishing pressure. Winter is kind of a hard reset for them. He goes on to say that bass get so concentrated around bait, there's a ton of water without bass in it, so it feels tough because you're genuinely not around the bass. And my goodness, that is some good stuff with a lot to unpack. Let's start first with the bait fish comments. Now the first thing that happens with bait fish in the fall is that they become abundant, and that's because of the shad spawn that happened in the late spring. When most of the bait fish got up shallow, they were rubbing on each other, they were spawning, they created, of course, small bait fish, And those threadfin, those gizzard only grew to be about a ½ an inch to maybe 2 inches in size. And so that's why you have so many of them, and that's why they are so small. The lifespan of, let's say, a threadfin shad is, I think, under 2 years. So that's why come fall time, there's not a whole lot of the 2 to 6 inch bait fish left because most of them die. That's why you have the whole cycle starting over again every year. So by the fall, there's a ton of bait and it's very small. And so because of that, throwing the same shad size lures that you have thrown in the spring, the summer, might not be the best choice because the bait fish are very, very small, and that directs my lure choices going forward. Now with everything in fishing, of course, there are caveats. Fish up north, smallmouth bass, a lot of different bodies of water have bait fish that are bigger that fish key in on in the fall. So I'm not saying it's always small bait fish, but for me in my experience, and probably a lot of you watching this video right now who are probably not in the north, your bait fish are usually small, and that's what bass are keying in on. Now the next comment he made was about an increase in fishing pressure, and I want to address that real quick. An increase in fishing is an increase in business. I'm in this industry, of course, I want to see more and more fishermen catching fish, but that does mean that our bass are becoming more educated. They're seeing more lures, they're seeing a lot of the same lures, and so they're a little trickier to catch than they used to be even 3-4 years ago. And for that reason, our fish come fall time have seen every lure imaginable, which is why it's so crucial to throw special, different lures, and of course, smaller lures. That's why I think they work really well, because the bait fish are small and because the fish are so tired of seeing the same size topwater, the same size lipless, the same size swim jig, same size topwater. If you throw something different or smaller, oftentimes that can trigger a fish that is so used to seeing the same stuff from every angler. Now, another Instagram commenter brought up this awesome point. She said this: sometimes I don't think anglers or even me understand how much the weather, the environment, and fish all play a part, as in how much there is to learn about the little details and how it can make or break a fishing day. Knowing the body of water, the structure, etc., to knowing the season we're in, to knowing what the fish are doing, to then knowing what we should be throwing and the presentation of each thing we throw and how it will be seen by the fish. Now, I think you could look at that comment and say, she's overcomplicating it. But the thing is, stuff gets complex in the fall, and a lot of anglers, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, it's just are inexperienced, myself included. We don't fully understand what's going on with the weather, with the bait fish, with the environment that we're in, and adding lures onto that, which ones to throw, which colors to throw, that's incredibly complex and really is not a problem in the spring and summer. But sadly, it is not the spring and summer, it's the fall.
Is it really?
So if so many things are changing, so much is up in the air, what consistencies can we hold on to help us understand fish better and of course catch more of them? Well, the first thing is that wind is your friend. And the very best pattern of wind to look for in the fall is several days of consistent wind going one consistent direction. What that'll do is move your bait fish, your ecosystems into certain areas of the lake and hopefully make fishing better in those areas. Now, is it always going to? No, the fish can move somewhere else, but the fish in the fall are going to be where the stuff they're eating is. And if the wind is blowing consistently for several days in one direction, you can probably guess more than likely the fish are in that area. The second consistency is that the early morning bite window and the late afternoon, early evening are the two best times to fish in the fall. Even though it is 32 degrees outside when I'm filming this video, I guarantee when the sun was rising behind me, there was a good morning bite the second the sun got up. And the best bite after that, especially once your water has started to get cold, is when the sun is up, it's been hot for a while, maybe it's 45, 50 degrees, and from the time of 11:30 to 3:30 is probably your best time of the day to catch fish. So don't worry if you totally missed the morning, there is still another good bite window in the afternoon. Now, like I said, there's caveats. You're going to find on your body of water that it doesn't matter what time you go. And you also might find that it doesn't matter because the fish aren't biting anyways. But from everybody I know, including pro anglers, those are the two best time windows they talk about in the fall. And the third consistency, and one of the most important ones for fall and winter, is that rock or hard bottom is ultra important. And I've said this before, that rock is super crucial basically from fall all the way till the post spawn, which is I guess most of the year. But hard bottom is also important in the summertime for fish that are in offshore areas, or around brush piles, around ledges. And so when in doubt, fish something hard, and if you see rock on the bank, it probably means there's rock deeper in the water, and especially in the fall, fish that rock with crankbaits, with jigs, with shaky heads, amazing on rock. And if you can, you want to rotate spots because the fish are moving around consistently, not always from down to up as they do in the pre-spawn. They kind of move from spot to spot, and rock is a great place for them to stop, especially because bait fish are probably going to be there. Now, of course, I want to touch real quick on the best lures for the fall and the winter wintertime. And again, it's like the monthly lure videos, the top 5 this. A lot of lures could fit into these categories, but I have been a huge fan. If these dogs would stop barking. As I was saying, I've been a huge fan of these suspending jerkbait for years and years. I think as that water gets colder, it's just so natural, and I understand that you have to slow down your retrieve. Whereas with other lures, I struggle slowing down. A jerkbait, I know if I pause it, it's gonna sit there and not float up. And so I like a suspending jerkbait, but I know that a shallow diving flat-sided crankbait like the Strike King Chick Magnet has been a great bait for a lot of pro anglers around the country. So I'm committing to trying more of the flat-sided crankbait. And if it works out for me, y'all will see it here on the channel. So if we know now that fall brings about so many weather changes, water temperature, water quality, water color, oxygen levels, and water levels drop, as well as bait fish increasing and spreading out across different parts of the lake, depending on the day, what the heck do you do? Well, the first thing I'm gonna say to encourage you guys out there is that it's okay. You're probably not a bad angler if you go several days only catching one fish or just a few fish, or heck, you get skunked a few days in a row and you're cold, and when you get a backlash, your fingers are too cold and you can't pick it out. It's okay. You're not a bad angler. You're just in the fall rut that I think all of us go through at some point. And the light at the end of the tunnel that Nolan said at the end of that message was that winter is kind of a hard reset for them, in his opinion. And I couldn't agree more. As the harshness of winter starts to come, that water temperature gets so cold, the bait fish start to die off. Those fish kind of start to go into hibernation, especially if you live up north. A lot of you guys, when I asked why fall and winter fishing is so hard, you responded, because my lake is frozen. Yeah, that is a hard reset for sure. Very much pun intended. And so because that reset is coming, the fish don't see as many lures in the winter. As soon as springtime and summer roll back around, the bass are going to be more willing to bite, and you're gonna have more and more good days out on the water. So what do we do with this time? If the fishing is at best inconsistent and at worst absolutely horrendous, what do we do to pass the time? Because we can't just fast forward our wristwatches to get to February, March, and April. For a lot of anglers, I think they just say, forget fishing, I'm gonna go in the woods and go hunting, and I don't blame you. But for those of us who don't hunt very often, I would encourage you to do this. Take the few months of fall and winter, whether it's a 6-month period for you guys that live up north, or a 2.5 to 4 month period like we have down south. Take that time to invest in learning. There are so many techniques to learn, retrieves to master, knots to understand, how to tie quicker. I think fall and winter should be the time of learning to get prepared, both mentally and physically, to get out there in the spring and summer and go back to catching bass. And one last tip that I have for you guys in the off season, per se, I don't call it that, but some casuals might, is that you want to spend this time, if you can, just fishing for anything. Fall and winter are fantastic times to catch a whole bunch of other species of fish. You've got trout, you've got salmon, striped bass, muskie, and of course every species of saltwater fish bites in the fall. And so I'm a firm believer that if you are just out there in the act of fishing, you are casting, you're retrieving, you're tying knots, you're setting the hook, you are making yourself a better bass fisherman, whether you know it or not. And a very helpful video that I made talking about the 3 things I've noticed that every successful angler does well, I will leave that video linked up here in the corner. My name's Tyler. As always, it's been a pleasure. All of my tackle that I talked about in this video will be linked down in the video description, and we'll see you guys next time right here on TRF.
Fall, what a great time to fish.
That's a good one. I'll have to remember that one.